Someone might be PhD or MTech as well. Masters.
भाई उसको बोल दे जाके कैमरा यूज करने सॉरी माइक्रोफोन यूज करने
We require that you sit up front as a punishment of communication. And this thing. Okay, cool. Again, I wrote one here, and Jerry.
उसको बोल दे कैमरा यूज करने सॉरी माइक्रोफोन यूज करने
We require that you sit up front as a punishment of communication. So, Mr. Videographer, is it cool now? Yeah? Good. Alright, so we are here to talk about financing higher education. Oh, so hopefully you folks are interested in higher education. If not, then we can tell you facts and have a discussion to explore your interest or maybe rekindle your interest or kindle your interest, whichever way. So where do we go here? So we're going to start with a story. Meet this kid from Bihar, lower middle class family, not enough income to actually pay for JEE coaching. Luckily, the kid gets picked up by Super 30. Folks have heard of Super 30? Anybody who hasn't heard of Super 30? Okay, great. Yeah, so gets picked up by Super 30, ends up in IIT Delhi, does okay there. At the end of 4 years, wants to go to CMU, Carnegie Mellon, to do a master's degree in mechanical engineering, his favorite course. Can't afford to go. For IIT, it's easy to get loans from banks such as SBI, other public sector banks. But going abroad is a different ball game, different scale of expense. So the requirement really is that the student has to have a home that the guy has to mortgage. Of course, he came from a low middle class family in Bihar, doesn't own a home, so no banks would give a loan to him. So he gives up on the dream, goes out, actually takes up a job, etc. etc. So 2 points in his life where we saw that there was a problem that was created by the current financing system that supports education in some form or the other. So that was my story. I am Janish again. So after college, I spent 5 years doing credit strategy work at a bank called Capital One. Have folks heard of Capital One? It's one of the top banks in the US, 9th or 10th by assets, a giant in the credit card game, but it's bigger than SBI in terms of total assets. So spent 5 years there working in the small business credit vertical, essentially doing credit strategy work, which is basically what now kids call these days as big data. So using data to come up with insights and strategic direction in which the bank should go, which product should we sell, who should we give out loans to, what interest rate should we give out loans at. So all of that fun stuff. Did that for about 5 years and meet Ankit. Ankit and I were working together, same team at Capital One. He was the manager to start with. And then he went on to complete his MBA at this B school called IESE. It's located in Spain. Have folks heard of IESE?
Well, I'll just interject him. If you ever want to do MBA, you should definitely explore ESA. It's in Barcelona, amazing place and amazing school.
Yeah, especially for soccer fans. But I'm not, so I'm kidding. Anyways, so yeah, so higher education, does it have advantages and disadvantages, right? People go, but why? Right, so we have actually analyzed data that shows that there's a statistically significant difference in income at the same time of students who go for higher studies, specifically doing a master's degree in the States, tend to have a higher income, even if we account for purchasing power parity. Right? So even folks who come back to India. So clearly there's an income thing. The other thing is obviously folks who are interested in the research area. If you want to explore your interest further, do something cool, do something scientific, even that's even that's where higher education abroad helps you gain a broader perspective. And you meet people, Ankit can talk about his experience with ESA. Essentially, you meet people, you learn different methods that folks elsewhere are applying for teaching, interest areas, industries that the research that's being funded by industries, and you get to explore all of that. Right? So opens a whole new world of possibilities if you go for higher education, be it in India, especially if you go out abroad. Any questions at this point? Okay, we'll go into specifics and perhaps that will bring out some of the interest.
So I think just one thing I want to mention out here is, just consider this as more of a session. It is classified as an informal session, but really just consider this more as a session when you have seniors and you talk to them. So of people of you who might be looking to go further for further studies abroad, you might be trying to reach out to your seniors, seeing what their experiences are. So I did my MBA, I didn't do an MS or something, but I have some experience of higher studies abroad, and both of us have actually experience of working abroad. So we have some sense on those fields. So we'd be happy to share and discuss with you guys any questions or concerns that you have. And really, before we go into the kind of financing side of it, we just really want to provide a sense of why higher education might be important, or what does really staying abroad provide you. And one of the big themes a lot of times that comes across is it brain drain? Like, what about that concept? And we fundamentally do not believe in that concept a whole lot, and we just wanted to use examples to prove why we think brain drain does not necessarily exist. There is some amount of it, but it's really dependent on the individual. So the first example is, how many of you have seen the movie Swades or heard the movie Swades? Yeah, so this movie was based on this particular gentleman who actually did his PhD abroad and then chose to come back to India, use his knowledge to actually serve the rural population. So that's really on the personal front. The second example is more at the corporate level. So we talk about the Birlas, the Tatas, the Ambanis of the world. This late gentleman was Aditya Vikram Birla, who went abroad. He was the grandson of Ghanshyam Das Birla. The Aditya Birla Group is actually named after him. He actually helped broaden the business into textiles, into telecommunications and other fields. If prior to that, it was actually not that big a conglomerate. And a lot of it has to do with this experience abroad. And then the third is really the poster child these days. Everyone wants to be in startups. And Kunal Behl, the CEO of Snapdeal, I'm assuming, I remember a guy standing at the gate asking, Snapdeal ka courier wala hai ki nahi? So yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys use Snapdeal or the Flipkarts of the world. So this guy actually was a Wharton graduate. And just a side note, Snapdeal actually started as a discount couponing website. They started with paper booklets, even before they went mobile and then into the Snapdeal business. And he actually saw that in the US when he was doing his undergrad, and he saw that and he said, makes a lot of sense. And his co-founder, Rohit Bansal, who was at Capital One. So that's how I know the backstory. And that's really where this thought of this idea, and then they came back and they said, this is what makes sense. And these are people who've proven their examples. I can give you unproven examples as well, which is the two of us. So we worked abroad, we saw things abroad, and we felt that if we have done analytics and we see that there is a scope of analytics and financial services, why can't we come back to India and solve that in the education sector? So that's, at this point in time, we are unproven. The future will still how it pans out. So moving on, we've talked about higher education is good. You can serve the country or your personal interests very well. But the bottom line is, it's expensive. By the way, how many of you are planning to go abroad or for higher studies, or are that in the thought of your mind? So I'm assuming you guys have, and how many of you are just focusing on MS? Cool, so you might have done your research around the costs of it, right? So this is just an indicative slide. Your numbers might be a bit different, but let me know if the numbers are out of whack or kind of in line with the expectation. Alright, so the bottom line is the number is 50 lakhs roughly. And for an average Indian, that's not chump change, to be honest. That's a significant amount of financing. So yeah, so the question becomes, yes, it's expensive, it helps you, but how are you going to get that financing? Really? So then really comes to the point of, okay, now I know I want to do this. I'm even gonna get an admit because my grades are good, my academics are good, my co-curriculars are good. How do I arrange for it? The one thing we always believe in is, if you get a free lunch, there are no free lunches in the world. If you get a free lunch, take that free lunch. The first free lunch is scholarships. There are cases where you'll have scholarships. If you look for it, just go for it. And for the people who are actually doing the research, so you guys might be looking for scholarships right now, right? What is your experience been like? Can you share it? Is it easy? Is it hard? Have you applied? What's been the response process look like? Anyone?
Downloaded the application, it was very badly for my Excel file. So it's a pain to find scholarships and then also do that.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, so at least given our experiences as well, so I was planning to do my MBA at ESA and I had a nightmarish experience looking for scholarships online because you can go to institute websites, but then as the scholarship you mentioned, a lot of people are not even aware that such scholarships exist. So that's really a big concern. There are free lunches, but you really need to look for them. And ideally, it should be a case where everyone should have access to it.
And same experience with myself. So last year I had an admit to University of Chicago before we started GyanDhan. And at that point I was doing for scholarships. And same experience, very difficult to find, even more difficult to apply.
So I will come to this later on because we want to address this segment as well. We want to make it much more easier and, as you mentioned, not make it as archaic as we are in the 19th century or the 20th century. We want to bring scholarships also to the 21st century. So that's the first thing. Then we move on to the next item, which is essentially now that you're already there. So you can do, it's kind of part planning. So hey, of the 50 lakhs, maybe I can get somewhere around 40 lakhs thereabouts. And then the remaining amount, once I'm there, I'll figure it out. I'll do part-time jobs, I'll do assistantship, I'll get some reimbursement out. It's another great resource. One is it gets you more exposure. You can get learnings on the job as well. But the issue there really is it doesn't really cover the entire portion. So if you're going for PhD, that's a completely different ballgame. But for people who are going to MS, our understanding is really doesn't cover everything, right? Thanks. So that's really the second part. The third is essentially, sorry. So generally, again, actually, let me put that question to you guys. For you guys who are actually looking for the MS PhD programs, if you can share your experiences, because at least our experiences or our juniors' experiences tell us if you are actually going for a PhD integrated program, then you get scholarships, which cover a large sum of the tuition fee.
A different nomenclature, usually called fellowships, and they're designated for very specific purposes, supported by foundations and such. Those scholarships are fairly on the generous side, so you can earn $30,000-$40,000 per year. That takes care of your expenses because things are subsidized. So yeah, that's it.
And then you've exhausted pretty much the external world, so to speak, which is not really charging you anything. So then you come to the third big bucket, which is essentially your parents or your personal savings. So if you work, like I worked for a while, so I had my own personal savings that I use for my MBA. But for you guys who are just graduating right now, for you it's really about using your personal savings. That's a good resource, and that's really the primary source of funding for students, Indian students, at this point in time, if you look at the data. I mean, my personal belief is what I've mentioned into the second bullet point, that it's really, in my viewpoint, dipping into your parents' hard-earned money. So I would want to use that, but not to the extreme wherein I put their own kind of future planning in jeopardy. So I think it should be used. I wouldn't say it shouldn't be used, but as responsible citizens, because you're now adults, you should be thinking on those lines as well. So that's really my personal take on it. And that brings us to the last point, which is what happens in the more in the developed world. In India, student lending is not that big at this point in time, which is really a good instrument to cover the shortfall of funds. So essentially, you are a student, you've gotten an admit, you go to a bank or you go to an institution and you say, hey, this is my admit, and the bank gives you a clear loan terms, and you apply for the loan. The only caveat, and it's a big caveat, is you should have proper planning even for student loans. Because there are many cases wherein people get into distress because they don't really plan their future out. Because the thing is, let's say you've taken a $50,000 loan, and if you actually want to do something else, then you're not going to get paid a whole lot. Then you'll have a lot of issues graduating out of college. So you need to properly plan accordingly. And that's really why loans, for us, being in the credit business, we think loans are a good resource to be used. But it's one of those things, if you don't use it properly, it can really happen to a lot. Any questions at this point in time? And actually, before we get into the details, have any of you gotten admits so far, or what does the process look like? Still open. Okay, fine. So yeah, application for the loans is kind of a bit out there for you guys, and really for us, the purpose right now was just having a discussion with you guys, telling you guys what the options are really.
So,
questions? Yeah.
so you put a figure for MS. So how similar is the figure for an MBA for you?
In terms of
Yeah, figure, money.
oh, for money. So yeah. So a rough ballpark, I would say 200 grand, $200,000. So just roughly 2.5 times this amount is what you're talking about. Because I can tell you, ESA is a 2-year program. My tuition fees was 72,000 euros. And a euro is, I don't remember the latest rate, but it will be close to $75. 75 rupees. 75 or 8. So yeah, 200 grand is the rough number you talk about in a top school. Any other questions? Sure. And that brings us very well to the next slide. So I'll talk about what are the current options for loans. And first we'll just discuss the Indian specific things, and then we can talk more globally. So if you look at the current options for loans, the first thing is, I'll ask you is, what do you think, who gives the loan? It's a bank. That's their business. They give out loans, they take deposits from you, from one person, they give loans to another person. It's as simple as that. Banking, that's the nature of banking business. And essentially you go out to a bank, once you guys get admits, you'll pretty much be applying to different banks. And the way it works is, a bank will have a credit policy. And what I mean by a credit policy is bank will have kind of a formula saying XYZ student, he meets this and this criteria, he'll get a loan at such and such rate. Now, what are the criteria and what are the rates? That really differs from banks to banks. But at a high level, in the current landscape, the big issue is if you go to a bank, you guys might have banks on campus as well, right? Bank branches. Do you have? No. So if you walk out and you go to a bank branch, or you go online, you will see banks in India currently have a limit of 20 lakhs for foreign education. And we saw the chart of 47 lakhs, so that really doesn't cover the entire amount. And on top of that, the bigger issue is what Jainesh was telling in his personal story, that all banks will require you to put in a collateral. And that collateral will be a home, or worse, it will be that you have to put in a fixed deposit as a collateral. So unless and until you don't have those two, banks will say thanks but no thanks. I can't give you a loan. That's really the landscape at this point in time. And on top of that, banks will also ask that, hey, have your parents be as a guarantor. So in the eventuality that you default on the loan, or you don't make the payments back, I'll go to your parent and ask them to give you those payments. So that's really, broadly speaking, the landscape in India. Banks do have good rates. So if you go to an SBI, you take a loan, if you are approved, you will get a good rate. It's a really, really good rate. The concern really goes back to your scholarship experience. You said the experience was pretty bad. That stays the same with the banks as well. Banks have moved online, but it's only the input process that has gone online. Everything else is manual. You get 10 calls and it's a long process, long drawn out process, which can be frustrating for students. I actually had a cousin of mine recently moved to Canada, and she had to go through, I think, 2 or 3 months of harrowing experiences just trying to finalize it. So right from start to end, you can think of almost 2 months as kind of fair figure to actually end up with a finance. So that's really the case. So we said 20 lakhs is the limit, it doesn't cover the entire thing. So what are your other options? Luckily in India there are other options, which are companies called NBFCs, or non-banking financial companies. How many of you here have heard about Credila or Avance? Good. So these are the two other companies which actually focus only on student loans. So what they do is they actually are willing to give out larger loans. So in this case, they will be willing to give out loans up to 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs. So up to the amount of tuition that you have, not the living necessarily. But the issue is really, they also require collateral, and they also require your parent to be a guarantor. And the one thing we didn't mention is, when we talk about guarantors, it's not a case that, hey, just a parent would be signing a document and it's done. They'll be looking at your parent's income. So if your parent is not a high earning applicant, your application will be denied. So that's really the problem with the entire process here. So even if you're a smart student, you are at 9.9, you haven't admitted into CMU, it's tough getting a scholarship, tough getting a loan in India at this point in time. The issue with Credila and Avance is really their interest rates are very high. It starts pretty much at 13.5%, 13.25%, and this after you have given a home as a collateral. That's really the case. One thing I'd mention on the Credila and Avance are really, these are at the end of the day, every company has to do marketing. We are doing marketing kind of at this point in time as well. But always read the fine print, because let's say if you go to some company's website, they'll say our interest rates are 9.33%, and then there will be asterisk at the top. If you reread the asterisk, that actually tells that it's an income tax based thing. So for you guys, the issue, how many of you guys are aware of the fact that you get rebates or benefits by the government if you take an education loan? Right, so if your parent takes an education loan on your behalf, they can actually avail of some income tax benefit. So with this case, guys, the case is they'll actually charge you 13.5%, but your parent will be making some benefits from an income tax basis. What they do from a marketing standpoint is, instead of quoting that 13.5%, they will tell, hey, we are charging actually 9.33, because that's really your click and wait thing. Get the customer in, and then we'll figure the other things out. So always in the financial services, read the fine print.
We have talked about, you don't have the foreign.
So I'll just use this thing. So there are foreign options as well, and given that this audience is primarily focusing on MS Amazon, right? At this point in time, I'll just focus on the MS bit. So for MS, if you're going abroad, you can actually avail of loans from US banks. The constraint there is you have to have a US based guarantor. And what I mean by that is you have to have a parent in the US or a relative in the US who is willing to be a co-signer. So he's willing to say that, hey, I am going to be the second party on this loan.
If you don't pay, then that person has to pay. That's the thing.
But if you have a guarantor, US based guarantor, and the guarantor is willing to sign, that's a great loan to go for, because there the rates can be, it's really dependent on that person's history or that person's credit scores, and the rates can be as low as 4 to 5% or 6%. So that's really one of the very good options if you plan to go abroad. But again, how many of you actually have relatives or close relatives abroad who would be willing to sign a loan for you? So yeah, that's one of the options you've got to evaluate. But for the others, it's not really out there. There are a couple of other companies doing other stuff, but that's more on the MBA side of other streams, so I wouldn't touch at this point in time, and we can discuss it offline. Yeah, so that really brings us to our marketing pitch pretty much, right? At the end of the day. So yeah, so what we did was as we said, we worked at Capital One, and just to give you an idea, Capital One, all the big banks in the US have been around for 150 years. Capital One actually started in 89 and went public in 94. It's the only bank in the top 10 which has essentially been around for less than 20 or 30 years, and it's one of the biggest banks in the US. And everything has been pretty much built on database and database approach, scientific approach. And that's really what we said, hey, we would want to bring this to the Indian markets as well. So what we're doing here in GyanDhan. So it's really an educate. Actually, before I get to that, has anyone gone through our website? Okay. So yeah, so I mean, it's basically www.gyandhan.com. But I'll give you an idea of what products we offer or what products we intend to offer. So the flagship would essentially be loans at the end of the day, because loans are, scholarships can only go so far. So I'll first focus on the lending part of it. So what we have done over the last 6 months is we've actually sat down with the leaders of top Indian banks, and we said, hey, we can provide you data analytics, we can provide you information on how you can differentiate between student A versus student B. And how can you make decisions based on that? How does a college impact? How does a triple IIT versus, let's say, a Punjab Engineering College differ? How does a student going to Harvard versus a student going to MIT differ? How do those things differ? And based on that, how can you make better decisions? Rather than having a case where it's only a 20 lakh limit, or you need houses of collateral and you need the parent to be earning significant amount. So where we are at right now is, this year we are in a position where we will be able to offer unsecured loans to students going to select colleges in the US and actually other countries as well. But we will be in a place where we'll be able to offer unsecured loans to students through our platform. So we have partnership with banks, and banks will be using our information to provide unsecured loans.
Roughly 100 colleges in total for the world across MS and MBA.
The rates should be competitive, starting as low as 10%, is what we discussed with the banks. And then the third key point is essentially, rather than having to go through each individual bank's website and applying and then having calls from 10 different officials, we want it to be a case wherein all our bank partners will have just one application form. We'll provide them one score, and we'll provide you that this is the bank that is giving you the best offer, and so you should probably go for that. So that's really what we do on the lending side of the business. Any questions on that? Scholarships. So as you said, it's kind of cumbersome and all that stuff. So for us, it was a case of we need to start somewhere, and we actually were looking out there on some scholarship aggregation websites, and for us, it was still not solving the problem. So, and again, as we speak, for us as well, it's in a beta stage. I won't say it's kind of robust for us, but where we want it to be is, for us, it's more of a wiki-based scholarship listing engine. So, I would encourage you to list the scholarships that you are searching for on that website, because a third person might tomorrow see that and get a sense of what should his options be, or what are his options, really getting that. So for us, the approach was, one, it should be a wiki-based listing engine, anyone can list, and it will be vetted through us. Going forward, what we want to do is actually bring that to the 21st century, as you mentioned. So of the scholarships that are actually out there, we want to kind of bring them on board in an online fashion. On top of that, actually work with the alumni groups and corporates to add more or launch more scholarships through this platform. So that's really the scholarships scheme. There is the third bit of grants. If you look at our website, I won't touch at this point in time. But really, the other thing that we are providing more than the financing bit is two other elements. The first key element is we would be the only player that will help you build up a US credit score if you choose to go to the US for higher studies. And are people familiar with credit scores? Anyone familiar with credit scores?
Civil.
Perfect. Perfect. That gives us time to talk some more. Okay. So before we get into that thing of what credit scores are, why they're important and stuff, quick thing. So you guys are planning for your MS. Have you reached out to your alumni? Or have you had discussions where should we apply and all that stuff? And then in the course of your regular curriculum, have you had questions where you thought you probably want to reach out to X, Y, Z, or do some kind of searching there?
Especially for your placement exercise. So did you folks have a need to touch base with alumni? Was that easy? Sorry?
You have their phone number so you can actually student job and then
Perfect. That's great. That's great. So essentially, well, that kind of reminds me more of ESA kind of a framework when it's pretty engaged community. But there are places where the students will have issues around kind of engaging with alumni, or maybe I have a research interest area which my particular college alumni don't really aren't aligned with, but some other college alumni I know has that same research interest area or some other interest area. So how do I reach that particular person? And that's really where we are building at this point in time a forum primarily where an alumni could be interacting with students.
It's probably, this thing is gradually getting relevant for triple IT, given its young age, that you would want to reach out to older alums, like somebody who is 6 years in his or her career and can offer you a very different perspective from somebody who is just starting their career. That's something usually a problem solving point, right? Because you don't really have their contacts.
Cool. I think so. We've pretty much done our marketing pitch at this point in time, but we will not leave you for now because we want to explain to you what does credit score mean or what is its implication. I'll hand it over to Jainesh to kind of take you through that.
Can I ask you two quick questions?
Sure.
When you talk about scholarships, are you only focusing on the masters and the MBA, or are you going down to the undergrad also?
So, as I said, so there are two elements to it. The wiki-based scholarship listing service. So that would be really open to anyone, right? So we could have undergrad people listing undergrad scholarships as well, and the search functionality would be such that you could even look for undergrad scholarships.
Okay.
Even school level scholarships, primary school, secondary school.
And my second question was regarding the alums. When you say partnering with alums,
Yeah.
are you looking at online forums, or would you also like to organize meets, etc., where one-to-one, these kids can have some interactions with seniors and all that?
Sure. So actually, we would have the one-to-one interactions as part of our plan. So what in terms of our kind of strategy, we want to actually engage with the students because we feel that an informed student would make better decisions. And as part of that, we want to have regular sessions, on-campus sessions. Sometimes it might be webinars, but other times it would be sessions like these, which will be more structured around, hey, I want to apply for MS, who are the 3 people I could bring on campus for giving guidance on that. And that's really where we would work with alumni to kind of facilitate those sessions. So just not be an online only forum, it would be an online come offline forum.
Alright, so credit score. Just want to have a few minutes on it. Really, so the thing is that, especially in the developed countries, and it started to become a big deal in India, even the small decisions such as, so whenever you take a postpaid connection, right, you will eventually, some of you may already have one, and if not, then you'll get one. They assign you a credit limit. If you take a credit card, right, folks have credit cards here, use any of the siblings' credit cards. Right? So if you have a credit card, there's a credit limit assigned to it. Right? Not everybody will get a credit card. Loans, we talk about loans. Loans become essential when you're trying to make a big purchase, such as a home or a car. Not everybody will get a loan, and if so, then they won't get, even for those who do get a loan, there's a gradation of interest rate requirements, the amount of tenor, so somebody would get a 10-year loan versus others would only get a 3-year loan, which has a direct impact on how much they must pay in EMIs. Okay. So the ability to borrow is dependent on your past record of borrowing. Right? The past record of borrowing is in all the developed countries and now even in India is kept in a central location called a credit bureau. So there are, so for instance, credit scoring in the US is more than 30 years old. In India, two of the credit bureaus in the US made investments and established a bureau called CIBIL. You guys will start hearing of it as you go. Credit card is the first thing that banks will try and push down your throats, right? And it's very useful, low fraud risk. It's not, because it's not your money. If somebody takes your credit information and does transactions on it, you are not liable for it. So there are several benefits, etc. Anyway, so basically people will try sell you credit cards. And that's where you hear of CIBIL score. And that's really based on your past record of payments. And this concept is usually passed on to kids in the Western countries at a very early age. Right? So you start borrowing when you are 13 or 14, you get your equivalent of PAN, a PAN card, and basically everything is just gets linked to that. Right? So that's the concept of credit score. Right? It's just a statistical summary of your past payment record. Straightforward enough? Right? It's good. So we saw a bunch of Be Like Bill names and we couldn't help ourselves. We're like, we have to put one, somehow find a place where we can insert one in our presentation. It is so good place, right? So this is the bill that should probably be like, right? So this Bill went to MS, they got a loan, education loan to pay for MS, eventually paid it back on time, and had a great credit score. And then Bill got an awesome job after the MS, wanted to buy a cool car, went to the car company, and this really happens in the States and even in India. When you go to car dealerships, they have link-ups with financing partners, either banks or non-bank financing companies, and their loan statements are totally based on what your past payment record is. This guy was paying everything on time, just like that, got a cool Merc that he drives off with. Right? So this actually happened with a friend of mine.
And actually, my second car in the US was a 0% interest rate product.
So yeah, so basically you don't pay anything just because your credit history is good. Your bank, your car company is confident that you, on an average, are a person that will, statistically speaking, pay your loan back. So they're good giving you a cheap rate. Yeah. And don't be like this one, right? So this guy didn't really manage his payments that well. Maybe it's not his fault, maybe it's fault. Well, especially this one has a pretty cool job with an investment bank in New York, but still didn't pay, right? So, lo and behold, a few years later, a couple of years later, when he wanted to buy a cool apartment, that wasn't really in his grasp because apartments in New York are super expensive, and the only way you can get one at an early age is through a loan. No bank would give him a loan. So poor Bill has to still bunk with his college roommates. And you know what? What really makes things very interesting is in all the developed countries, landlords, before renting out apartments, not selling them, right? Before renting out apartments, they look at your credit score to see if you will, whether you'll be able to make or are you reliable enough to make payments on an ongoing basis. If you miss a payment, that gets reported to your credit score. Right? So, for instance, my credit score was checked before I got my first apartment. In the US, Ankit's credit score was checked when he got his apartment. So poor Bill can't even get his own apartment on rent. He has to bunk with his roommates for several years until his credit history gets cleansed. So that's what the concept of credit score is. When folks move from India to the US, either for their jobs, the notorious H-1B visa, which you guys may have heard about, and either or for education, you really start as a newborn person in the States, right? You have no history. And that makes it very difficult for you to even get a credit card, which is requisite for several purchases, right? It's not a debit card friendly country. And then you can't get several other things like loans, a car becomes a necessity in several colleges, right? You want to buy a second-hand car for $5,000, you'd rather pay it off in 10 installments of $500, not happening. So all of that can be rectified if we have a credit score that's built for you. So that's where we talk about the credit score bit of our welcome. Does that make sense? Okay. And that is it, right?
Yeah. So I think what we have at this point in time is really, there's a link and we have paper printouts as well. What we wanted to get a sense from you guys is how many of you would be interested in going for MS this year, and basic details. You have to email what colleges are you targeting, what are you looking for an education loan or not, because we are in the process of kind of signing the agreements with the banks. We'll be rolling out the product, so we'll be emailing you guys back saying, hey, we can now start the application process.
And And those who have relatives in the States, we have that covered as well. We're working with banks over there. Very useful. Any questions?
Questions?
Anything on, any colleges that you heard about and you want to know how good or bad they are? Any tidbits on cities and states in the US that are cooler than the others? Something you might have heard but you want to verify? Good. Good. Research is good.
Very important. It's the best.
Sure, yeah. That's why we can talk about it. So, especially for folks who are looking at studies abroad for the next year. Yeah, anything on loans, anything we touched upon on scholarships, names of cool scholarships, how you apply for them.
So, I think anybody having, so if you know, you have scholarship, you have to usually show the university that you have some amount of money, so that you will become registration before seats or
वीडियो क्वालिटी तो आ रही है क्या
वीडियो क्वालिटी कैसे करें
इंटरनेट स्पीड
That's my understanding, right? So, let me think about that. Yeah, unless you are a resident in the States, they won't issue you a loan. Right? So, they are bound by laws there. They don't have a process to issue a loan. For Indian, you won't be able to get financing from banks over there. If you're in India, many banks actually don't give you a loan until you have a visa. And on the other hand, visa requires that you have source of funds. So it's a very chicken and egg kind of situation. To be frank, Credila has solved that problem, and we on our website have solved that problem. So we will be able to sort of get you the proof of funds that you need to approval. Yeah. So sorry, 2 questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is a general idea that when you go out for a higher education in the West or anywhere outside, so the expenditure is so high that you have to work a few years, a lot of years there, so you can repay it before coming back. So how true is it, or what are the options that we can come back to India and still repay that significant difference?
Yeah, no, actually, it's a fair question. It's actually true that it gets difficult to pay off the loan in a country where the purchasing power parity is very low, right? So, everybody knows the nominal difference, but the actual difference in terms of purchasing power parity is roughly 1/3, right? 1/3 to 1/4. So that means your pay on a relative basis will be lower by that, right? 4 or 5 times lower. It gets very difficult to pay off. So what we see in the data is 97% of the folks graduating out of colleges actually work in the US for 2 to 3 years. Right, and couple of things, right? One, it's not that you can't come back and repay. So I have friends who have come back with awesome jobs and they've been able to repay. And this takes some more time. Right? The actual installment isn't too high. So you have to think about 2 things when you're talking about repaying the loan, right? One is how much per month, right? So what's the monthly installment? If I take 40 lakh rupees was the example, and if I spread it over 12 years, that's 144 months, right? So if I'm spreading that much amount over, it's not a big deal per month. But it sticks with you, you continue paying interest. The downside is you continue paying interest on it for 12 years. Right? We being a very anti-credit, anti-loan country, culturally, have this notion that we must stay in the US to pay it off within 2 years or 3 years. Right? So that's the real plan.
Actually, I can give you my example. So I graduated from ESA in 2015, and I have a Spanish loan. I have taken a loan in Spain. I'm currently paying. So I think, and that goes back to the point we saw. Are they paying you 30 lakhs? Are they paying you 20 lakhs? Are they paying you 50 lakhs? You should have that in your mind pretty crystallized, that once I have that income, what would my regular expenses look like? What would be my savings? Out of that savings, I need to be making these regular payments. Can I fund that or not? And if I cannot fund that, then definitely I need to stay back in the US for a year or so. That's something you've got to be very clear about. And that's really where the issue is when students get into trouble. around, even in the US, a lot of students take huge amounts of debt, and MBA is a prime example of that. People take significant amounts of debt. They don't realize that what are the jobs they are getting out of it, and then how much are they paying. They haven't adjusted their living standards. That's really where it comes to bite.
Yeah, don't buy a car, buy this. Definitely not a must. So yeah, so definitely yeah, you guys are smart enough to do the numbers. This is a question of having the intent and understanding that you really do some part of counter.
One small question, Portugal is a very US-centric program. So how is the scenario in Europe? Is it more difficult for me to get a loan, pay back the loan? How's Europe?
Sure. So we focus on the US because 60% of the Indians go to the US, and it has a relatively similar percentage of the best universities in the world. Europe, so the other popular destinations are UK, the second most popular, then France, Australia, Canada, Germany, UAE, actually, and the rest of the countries are fairly rare in terms of getting into. Right, but to answer your question directly, is it easier or tough? Germany is actually much cheaper. Right? So that's an exception. So if we take Germany out of the equation, it's actually equally difficult to get loans in other countries. Of course, the other thing you have to keep in mind while taking the decision of working in a country is the macroeconomic condition of that country, because that impacts the odds of you getting a job after. Right? So you guys have heard about the situation in Europe and how it differs from country to country. So when you're making that decision, take that into account. Do some research, talk to us, write to us, and we'll sort of help you with the outbound job process.
So in Europe, just to add to that, in Europe the advantage is there are a lot more scholarships, so to
Yeah.
speak, and that's more, universities are incentivizing students to come to European schools rather than go to US schools. And that's the business model part of it. And so it makes it easier for students to move to Europe. But to his point, you've got to be cognizant of the fact that if you're going for that MS or for that higher studies primarily for research, then you have to look at that institute from a research standpoint. But if you're going from a standpoint that will get you a job, then you have to be cognizant of the fact that, hey, if you went to a beautiful university in Spain or in Germany, graduating out of that university, chances are you probably might need to know the local language to land yourself a better chance at getting that job.
And exactly. And the employment statistics are very difficult to internalize and interpret, because many universities, India is actually fairly notorious here. The way we publish our employment statistics is, the truth is tangential at best. Right? We don't. It's not very transparent. Right? You guys, I see smiles around the room, right? So you've seen it. And same is the case abroad, right? So they don't lie. It's just managed truth. And you see, right? And so you see overall, yeah. This is these many people get placed. This is the median package. You have to sort of double click on it. And is it true for Indian students? Is it true for Indian engineering students? Is it true for Indian engineering students with a mechanical engineering, with a computer science degree? Is it true for Indian students? Right? So basically, there are these multiple parameters. And again, to put a shameless plug in there, we can help you with that. We can help you sort of make that assessment, because that's literally literally part of what we do.
So actually, I mean, that's the whole point. That's why students from certain colleges or certain branches would be getting unsecured loans, or with certain backgrounds would be getting unsecured loans. Because would be priced, so rather than going out there in the market and saying, hey, Credla or whatever XYZ company charges 14% for everyone, or only 14% and above. What we want to do is we want to say, if a student is smart enough, has proven, take the credit score model. If you've proven your merit, you should be getting a better product.
Yeah, you come here, you did well in general, so yeah, you should get a better rate than most students, because on average, not to say that folks from other colleges lower, rank is a very weird thing anyway. Colleges won't do well. Like many of my friends are, spread across different colleges in India, they're awesome folks, doing amazingly well. Many are much more intelligent than I am. This is a question of averages. Good discussion. Any more? I like this question. Sure, yeah, sure.
If I do a master's, I take the loan to my master's and I pay it. But after my master's, if I want to do a PhD, that's fine. But while I'm doing my PhD, the fellowship income I'm getting by my fellowship, that's going into my living PhD. So I can't really take out my loan. So would you recommend that? Because then I have to, let's say, pay my loan after 7 years of me taking the loan maybe. So would you recommend this?
Yeah. So let's again going to this question, right? So Indian banks are very generous in terms of the amount of years they give. SBI, even our loans would be for 12 years, right? So it's you're spreading 40 lakhs over more than 100. So the idea is that ideally you want to pay that back as soon as possible, right? American banks have smaller payment periods. So one thing, right, one possible strategy of navigating what you just mentioned would be to have small minimum payments during your PhD and then wrap it up soon after. Right? The other strategy would be what Anya was mentioning during the presentation. Look for if you can make that decision of going for PhD in advance, right, and not before, or make it the other way around. Make a decision of MS plus PhD first, and then ditch the PhD if you don't like it, right? So if you can make that decision, then you can go for fellowships of combined programs, and that way you won't even run into that problem.
And if you choose to decide to go for PhD after the MS, don't buy a book.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as simple as that. Then you'll have to just make adjustments accordingly and say, hey, we should be making the payments accordingly. That's really the only thing.
Oh, and one more thing that occurred to me was, if you've been in the US for 2 years, take a loan from us or from a bank in the US. 2 years will give you a good credit score. So for your PhD, you should be able to get a loan from the US. And that would help, right? In terms of your interest rates would be lower, and therefore the payment burden, there will be a new payment holiday kind of. Okay, Shanti. Oh, one more question. Ask.
Yeah, I wanted to know about your revenue model. How do you people work now?
Sure. So that's true. So our revenue model is so banks have these channel partners called GSAs,
Okay.
direct selling agents. So it's very similar to direct selling agents, but the difference obviously is all the statistical jargon that we're talking about. Basically, just helping them build a new student potential centric credit score.
Okay.
So our revenue model is basically we charge a higher cut from the bank.
Okay. And what about from the student side, people who associate with you?
Right.
Are you charging them something, the students?
Nothing at all.
Nothing.
So the student payment is, so we're not charging anything on the students, nothing for you guys, it's all on the banks. And really why it makes sense for the banks is because right now, you read in the papers how education loan NPAs are through the roof, etc. Right? And that's the worry for banks. Right? And what we are saying is, hey, we can tell you which areas in the whole student, in the whole education loan ocean, which areas you should be targeting to make more money, incur less NPAs, and that's really the benefit that they're getting.
And you have a pan-India presence?
So we are tying up with a couple of very big banks. We can talk offline and share the names of the banks with you as well. So, but 2 of the top 5 banks, and through them we have a pan-India.
There are comparatively newer programs like Masters in Finance, Masters in Information Management.
MIS.
So, how good are those programs?
Yeah, so again, that's something we can help you understand on a very granular level, at a high level to answer your question. Right, so questions like these are very difficult to answer in a short time period. It depends on so many things. But on an average, again, stressing on an average, I've seen MSFE, MS in Finance, is as good, if not better, than MS in Computer in terms of job. MIS is slightly worse than MS in Information in IT, so Information Technology, right? But it's better than the research-oriented programs, such as biotechnology. Again, on average, right? So we can help you get even more granular insights, if you talk to us after, in terms of, I mean, the model, because the model way that is the exact kind of prediction of odds of getting employment.
I just can't refrain myself from making a comment here, but don't go for MS in finance over MS or over MIS just because it has a better job prospects. That's definitely got to be the case, because that's one of the fundamental problems as well with the Indian landscape historically been that students just look at the employability prospects and go in and then realize they don't have the aptitude or the interest for that. So you guys are now adults, mature enough. You guys should be doing that research bit as well before taking that jump. Just don't go via statistics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a multi-input model that you have to look at, right? One of the inputs is employment.
How can we reach you offline if we have some questions?
Sorry?
How can we reach you offline if we have
Sure.
questions?
Fill the form, and our email, we can write it up here on the board. Or yeah, just create a new slide one now. Easy. Just take down the IDs or fill up that form, that weird link that you see up there. Or we have here papers and pens that you can just use to write down your email and read it back to you. Right, open up a communication channel.
So first thing got last name at GyanDhan.com. Ankit.Mehra.
So, सही है.
And we are actually
I was in the-
we work out of an office space.
Same travel.
Yeah, so just, you got
They just
see
announce
it.
it on it. You can come by.
Hmm?
I saw Nath
क्या?
delivering
Quality
it
see
on
उसकी?
campus.
किसकी?
Yeah.
एक मिनट.
yeah, don't order. How many have actually ordered?
Word